Okay, can everyone see the first slide? Just making sure we've got the right screen sharing. Paul, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it? I can see your face.
Yep, looks good.
Wonderful, thank you. Right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you all taking the time to come and see us today. Really, the whole point of this event is inspiration. It's to be inspired. Inspired to investigate how to build smarter content through the use of MarkLogic, and in particular through the use of ontologies and semantics to build knowledge graphs around your content, and hopefully to be even more inspired by hearing from our other customers and vendors and see what they can do and what they can bring to your project to make it even better. A couple of housekeeping things. Please do use the chat in Zoom to ask any questions that you've got. You can direct those either to Phil or just leave them open to everyone. And we'll try and collect those, and we'll go through a Q&A session later on. If you have any issues using chat, you can email csm@marklogic.com and we'll pick them up there as well. We'll also keep an eye on social media. So if you want to reach out and comment on what you're seeing and how things are going, please feel free to do that as well. So the first thing I want to start with is a quote, and I think this is just a lovely quote that I think we really like here at MarkLogic, as it cuts to the core of the issues that many organizations are facing right now. And it's not about the amount of content and the amount of knowledge that people have got in your repository, but it's about the ease in which you can find it and relate it and monetize it. So really what we're trying to do today is to talk about how we can create smarter content that's easy to discover through the use of ontologies and semantics that build that knowledge of graph, make it discoverable. And not only going to hear from us, you'll hear from the team at Graphifi, who are going to have a demo of their ontology management tool. And you're also going to hear from Thierry from OECD, who we've spoken to before and is always a joy to listen to. So the objective today, really, we know lots of organizations have gone through digital transformation for many years. And really what we're seeing is that sort of shifting forward and accelerating. As markets are moving quickly, customers are demanding more, and you need to stand out from the crowd, and you need to do more with the content that you have in your repository. And many of you on the call are already MarkLogic customers, so you're already on the way to that journey. You know, you've got your content stored in a powerful repository, but there's more to be done with it. There's more knowledge and more gold to be found in that content if we can find ways to enrich it and cost effectively make it available to your customers. So today is about trying to find new ways of visualizing that content and making that content richer for you. So imagine here, you know, you've got a piece of content. This might be an article. And what we've done is we've actually looked and mapped that content to an ontology, to the entities, the business terms that matter to you and your customers. So here we've got an article on, you know, a piece of content, and we've pulled out that there are certain chemicals involved or certain pests or crops. So you could imagine a customer can now see that visualization of the article and start to click things on and off, drive into more content associated around one of those entities, and find a new way of navigating through that content. You can look at those concepts and align them to your content, either manually or semi-manually, using something like an authoring tool. So here we've got Fonto on the left-hand side, and it allows you, as you're authoring that content, to actually align it to the ontology and start putting those terms in. Or you can use the power of MarkLogic or some of our partners to actually automatically identify those entities in the content and actually start to create those relationships between the content and build that knowledge graph. And we'll touch on that a bit more in our second session next week. And I also wanted to mention this. This is a lovely use case from Wolters Kluwer, and they call it their search that talks back. And we've got a video online if you want to take a look at it. And it's really about guiding the user through their search experience to get them to the right piece of content. So in this example, you start to type in you're interested in auto costs. And as you do that, it brings up a list of terms from the ontology and says, okay, yeah, I can see that you mean this auto cost here, and you can select that. The nice thing it then does is it then gives you the next set of concepts in the hierarchy and say, okay, do you actually want to then focus down on one of these terms? So you can very quickly drill through and select the next term. And then you say, okay, and I want the word percentage. So you've now focused your content right the way down to the content that matches those ontology terms and has the word percentage in it. And the great thing that Wolters Kluwer have done is they've broken their content into small content objects that they've then enriched. So now not only do we get a document, we actually get the bit of content that's got the word percentage in that matches those ontology terms returned in our results. So we don't have to spend time drilling through and looking for that content. So it's a really powerful way of finding what you're looking for. And if you think back to that quote right at the start, it's not about the knowledge that you've got in your repository, but it's about the discoverability. And that's what we're trying to do here with smarter content. And we see that as a roadmap, and most of our customers are already somewhere along that roadmap. You know, those of you that have got your content in MarkLogic, you know, you're already creating structured or semi-structured content. You've got it in MarkLogic, you're indexing it, you're probably publishing it either internally or externally for searching. So you're some way down this roadmap already. But we think there are next few steps to really drive that smarter content around creating or adopting ontologies to define the context, and then looking at the entities and extracting and understanding that content, and then putting that together in a knowledge graph that gives you those different ways of looking at the content. So the chances are MarkLogic's doing great things for you today. You know, you're getting good value from it, I hope. But there is more you can do with the technology that you've got to drive this knowledge graph and find new ways to recommend and consume and monetize your content. So the agenda then. So today is all focused around smarter content and ontologies, and you're going to hear from Graphifi and OECD. Next week, this time, we're going to focus on entity extraction and semantics. And we've got a demo from DataVid. They're going to show you how to take content that you've got in MarkLogic and actually do entity extraction and then align it to your ontology. And we've also got a demo from SmartLogic that will show some of the tools and power they've got in their application. And then week 3 is really around the inspiration, the blue sky, showing you things that you can do once you put these things in place. And we'll talk through some customer stories. We'll talk through some blue sky, some things that we think you can do. We'll do some demos about other platforms that we've created. So if you've got business people in your organization who you need to bring along on this journey and get them excited about what you can do with knowledge graphs and semantics, that's the journey, that's the session to make sure that they're signed up to. Okay, key terms. There's a few things we just want to set to make sure everyone's on the same path. There'll be some people I know who have joined today who are new to this area, and others that are, been doing it all their life. So bear with me, those of you that know what they're doing, and for the others, hopefully this is a quick intro to some key terms that you'll hear today and over the next few weeks. So if we start the most simple, a concept, that's the name or label for something. So it may be blue. It's the most basic concept we're talking about. And then the taxonomy is a list of those concepts, so a range of colors, for example. And then the ontology is the description of how those relationships come together for those terms. So if you imagine a taxonomy generally tends to go up to a single root element, an ontology is more like a web. It shows the relationships between all of those terms. So you might have your list of colors, but how it maps against a list of car makes and models and standards that you're allowed to do. And alternative labels and synonyms are basically another label for saying the same thing. So it might be a foreign language term, it might be an alternate name that you've given something, but there are terms that if you want someone to search for this term, you want them to also find all of these other things that are exactly the same. SCOS, you'll hear that mentioned a few times. It's a standard for creating those relationships, and it's got a few very standard terms in there like broader and narrower, pref label, alt label. So these are things around defining the way your taxonomy is brought together. URI, we all know what a web URL looks like. A URI is like that. It's a uniform resource indicator, and it's a way of specifying a link to an individual resource. And then entities, we've touched on that a few times. An entity is the core element that represents something that's important to your business. So maybe it's a customer, it's a product, it's a drug, it's whatever means something to your business. They're the core things that we can map and allow your customers to drill through. So we'll put a screenshot of this in the chat, so you guys can reference back to this if you need to as we go along. So there's a whole bunch of value that comes from having an ontology in place. Some of them are quick wins, some of them will take time, dedication, and the right people to put in place. But it all comes to coming together to build the backbone of what you're trying to do and how you're making smarter content. So just to cover off a few of those sort of key concepts, if we imagine that in our content, we've got that piece of content related to a country. So we could store the country label in the content, in the metadata, and say, this piece of content is associated to Burma. And I think you can all see where I'm going with this one. At some point, the world changes and the country changes its name. And now that text label is out of date. But if we'd used a reference URL, we can actually say inside the metadata, this is the country that we mean. We mean this string. And then we can go back to our ontology tool and we can say, tell me the current label for this country. So we can always make sure we're getting back the right information and we've only got to maintain it in one place. And that also opens up the opportunity to talk about other labels. So rather than going back and just getting the English label for something, we might want to say, okay, we've tagged it in English, but why not give me back the Spanish or the German version of that word? Because that's the label and the language that I'm presenting in the UI right now. So by dereferencing it and using the URI, you've got lots of options on what you serve up to the user, even though you've tagged it in one particular way. Synonyms and alternate labels, you know, a really obvious example here is if we're searching for the term gas. Well, what do we mean by gas? You know, it might mean petrol, it might mean natural gas. So if we've got our hierarchy of our terms, as we start to type the word gas, we can go away and look up the terms and find what it is we mean. And we can drive the search to be more accurate. And it could be product names, product codes, whatever it needs to be, that someone should search for one term and find all the matching terms at the same time. And then the last thing here, one more, is broader and narrower. So here's an example where we've searched for something, you know, coconut. Well, coconut's a plant, we know that, but it's also a pest. And you can see here in this article, the pest isn't actually called the coconut beetle, it's known as the coconut beetle. So we've put the word coconut in, we found an alternate label for it. We're showing that here in the search preview for the user to select the right one. And if they want, they might want to widen that search. So they might have typed the word coconut in, but now they can see, well, actually, I can select all oilseed plants. So I'll click on that here and it will provide a broader search across all of those terms. So it's a really nice way of driving your users' search, making it more accurate and giving them more flexibility at the same time. And the last thing we mentioned a couple of times, entities. So these are the really key business terms that matter to you and how they relate together. And we can visualize those. So it's another way for a user to drive through the content and find the thing that they're looking for. And it's a nice, rich experience that lots of customers are demanding now to make them easier to navigate. And also you can build off recommendations. So you can see that if users like these particular things, you can offer up others. So again, you build up the relationship, build that information from the knowledge of what the customer's doing and your content. So how do you go about creating and obtaining these sort of ontologies? Well, there's lots available out there on the web for a variety of different domains. So the first thing you want to do is find out whether there's an ontology available for your domain already. Because if you can share that domain, you can share that ontology, then you've got a shared knowledge. Everyone knows what you mean when you tag it in a certain way because it's a standard that you adhere to. And it's going to jumpstart you into tagging your content and making it richer. If there's not something available or you want something more custom, then you can absolutely create your own ontologies as well, specific for your business. And you can just start from scratch. You could look through the content and look for the frequencies of words to start to build out some key terms that you want to place in context. One thing I would recommend, having gone through this kind of stuff myself in other roles, is you want to employ a taxonomist or a knowledge scientist, someone with the skills to help you bring this together and ensure the quality. You know, we put a lot of effort into making sure our code quality is good. We do a paired programming, we do QA, UAT. We go through all of these sessions to make sure that our code is good. And it's just as important that you make sure the data is the right quality. So get the right people in there who can help drive this forward for you. And there are also really powerful tools to help you do that. So, you know, we've got a number of customers using Pool Party to allow you to bring this together. We've got MarkLogic, who will present next week around some of the entity extraction work that they're doing. And we've got Graphifi and Graphology. So these guys have got a really powerful, easy to use ontology management tool. It's built on industry standards, and it's got some really powerful collaboration features. So you can think like Google Docs for ontology management. And the output from that can then be connected into MarkLogic. So I think it's going to be a very interesting demo. So with that, I will hand over to Paul and Ravinder from Graphifi.
Thanks, James. So hi, everybody. I'm Paul Appleby. I'm one of the co-founders of Graphifi, along with Ravinder, who's also on the call. So just a quick 30 seconds about who Graphifi are. We are a startup. We've been going 2 years. The first 18 months of that was spent building our two products. Graphology is one, the other is EasyGraph, and they serve different purposes. So as James mentioned, Graphology is around taxonomy and ontology management. EasyGraph is about knowledge graph delivery, and that works with triple stores such as MarkLogic. That's one for another call. So we've been around 2 years. We've been live since the end of last year, and Graphology is what we're going to cover today. So one of the things we believe in is starting small, and I think James has already hinted that a knowledge graph is a journey, and so really the first part of that journey is what we're going to cover, creating some taxonomies, some ontologies, and just doing some basic stuff that will get you some solid foundations for moving forward. So starting small, get some value quickly. We hear a lot of people talking about the difficulty in maybe showing how this stuff has value. So, a pilot, start small, do some taxonomies, and Graphology is really geared up to help you do that kind of thing. It's a service, so you can simply go sign up and get going straight away, which is, one of the barriers that we've been trying to break down is to get people going quickly. So you don't need to spend a fortune up front. You can simply sign up and get going. So we'll build on some of the stuff that James mentioned on his slides. And there's a few basic steps that really James has already touched on. And those are using identifiers. And under the covers, Graphology and MarkLogic, as one of its features, is RDF. So it's all RDF underneath the covers, which is semantic technology. And our identifiers are the backbone of that. And then we have taxonomies and ontologies, and using those with taxonomies, and then something called SCOLS XL, which is an extension to SCOLS that allows you to go a little bit further. So in the taxonomy world, there are certainly areas where taxonomies are not enough anymore, and we call it taxonomy plus plus. So ontologies and the standards behind them are fairly big beasts, and you don't necessarily need to know all about it to get some value from your ontologies. Some basic parts of the ontology can get you an awful long way, especially when you combine them with your ontologies. So we'll go through these steps and show how Graphology can help you on each of these steps. So if we just switch a little bit more on identifiers. So James has already touched on identifiers, and you can see a couple of examples on screen. But I think just to reinforce the basic principle here, because it's foundation to all of this, is that an identifier and a URI or IRI, it's the point at the bottom on the screen. It allows you to unambiguously know what something is. So whether it's the concept of red or a product or anything that you can think of, it's a unique identifier for that thing, irrespective of language or anything else, essentially. And the form of your URI, to some degree, doesn't matter. There are pros and cons, and there are many approaches that you can take. As you can see on screen, both of those could represent red quite happily. So for our examples today in graphology, we've set it up just to show some basic examples based around the idea that I want to buy a red T-shirt. Now that might sound very trivial, and obviously we're talking kind of in the area of maybe a shopping website or something like that. But there are some basic questions that people might need to ask of your website and in your service, and it might be things like, well, I want red T-shirts. Well, what does red mean? To that customer and in your systems. What does T-shirt mean in the customer's language? Obviously, T-shirt is English. They might ask questions like, I want a crew neck T-shirt or a V-neck T-shirt. There are many different kinds of T-shirt. And then, of course, there are aspects such as the size and some of the features, such as does it have long sleeves or short sleeves? And then potentially there are other aspects to it. Well, T-shirts aren't the only thing in your shopping catalogue. Potentially, there might be other items that you want to also connect together. So we use this as the basis of our demo, and so we will switch at this point over to graphology. Now, I'm running this on our development server, and this is a live demo, so fingers crossed. So when you plug into graphology and you sign up, this is essentially what you see when you first go in. If you've got a subscription. So we have the two applications on the left, Vocabulary Manager and Ontology Manager. Dashboard is where permissions and user management are controlled. And then obviously you have the usual stuff like your account and obviously links off to the documentation. So Vocabulary Manager obviously is taxonomies, Ontology Manager is ontologies. So we will start by looking in the Vocabulary Manager. And everything in graphology is based around a project, and you can have as many projects as you like in both Vocabulary Manager and Ontology Manager. And for today's purposes, we've set up one for this demo. So we'll go into that one. And once you're in a project, you can see that we have various things on display. Project can consist of as many taxonomies and collections as you like, and collections are another part of the SCOS standard, and we'll touch on those a bit more later. But yes, you could have one taxonomy, you could have many taxonomies. So in this instance, for this demo, we've created a handful of small taxonomies, but at the bottom, you might notice we've also imported the UNESCO thesaurus, which is an external taxonomy, quite a large one that we've imported for today's demo, and you can essentially have as many in there as you need to for your purposes. So I say on the right, we've got collections, and they come in two different kinds, ordered and unordered collections, and we'll come back to those again later. So just one more slide for the moment. So our first problem, I guess, is what exactly do we mean by red? Now, obviously, colour perception and all that stuff is a pretty complex area, but really what we're talking about here is the ability to know that maybe something in our shopping catalogue is red. If you look at those two pictures on screen, I ran them through a colour detection algorithm, and they both came up as red. Now, that's up to the individual to argue whether they are red or not, but essentially there may be a requirement in an automated system to do that kind of automated detection. We may need to obviously to present a set of colours on our shopping website. Most would have that as a filter when you're looking for an item of clothing. And so really we need to know that we're all talking about the same thing. And that's really one of the tricky parts in terms of language and technology. So switching back to the Vocabulary Manager. So you can see that we have a small colour taxonomy in our system. So in our little universe of today, we only have 4 colours, so it's limited, but it serves the purpose, hopefully, of showing what we need. So if we click on red, And what you see is all of the detail about red. Now, all of these properties that you see are all from the standard SCOLS model. It's a fairly big model and covers many use cases. But for our purposes, we're just going to show a few of the properties and features. So the first thing to note here is that we have our identifier for red, and this is the URI at the top. And we have two labels, one in red and one in rouge. So, or one in French, sorry, which is rouge. So that immediately gives us the ability to say what red means in various languages. And obviously, in a multinational company, you may need to present information in different languages depending on your user or their language or their location. You may also want to say that things are fairly similar. So here we've said actually that all red and crimson are actually related. That they're probably fairly close in colour terms for most people. So that covers the language side of things. But on our slide, we mentioned about maybe colour detection. Well, how do we define colour detection in this respect so that it's of use in an algorithm? Well, this is where we start to see. This is where we start to see the use of an ontology coming into our taxonomy, and we'll come back to the ontology a bit more. But what you can see at the bottom here is that we've defined a property called hex color. Now, in CSS, most people probably know that it's used for displaying websites and formatting websites, and colors are described in this way. And so this essentially is the hex value for red. And our color detection algorithm, for instance, may be able to use that in its processing and then use this information to connect it back to our identifier. So whether it's a machine or people, we essentially can reference back to the same concept for the concept of red. So one of our other questions that we asked was what kind of t-shirt? So if we go into the clothing taxonomy, you can see we have a small set of different kinds of clothing here. And down here we have t-shirt. Now, we've defined two narrower concepts of t-shirt, and if we click on the detail, we can see that on the right. So we have crew neck t-shirt and v-neck t-shirt as two possible, there are obviously many others, but there are two possible narrower, more specific concepts, more accurate definitions, you could argue, of what a t-shirt is. And narrower concepts is just one way to do this kind of thing. You could potentially use properties too. Some of the other interesting facts about what we're seeing on screen. Again, we have t-shirt in multiple languages. So in this instance, we have it in Italian, we have it in Russian. But obviously there are different ways of describing things in the same language. So t-shirt, but we also have lower down alternative labels, different ways of describing a t-shirt in a particular language. T-space shirt, t-shirt. This kind of information, I think, as James touched upon, this can be used for search, helping in search. So things like query expansion, or if somebody types in one of those alternative labels into a search, you can probably get your system to connect it back to the actual concept that is t-shirt. So there are many uses there in search expansion, in entity extraction, where these kind of things can help and give you back to the canonical concept that you're trying to work with. So other interesting things that we see on here is the related concept of genes. So we mentioned on our questions at the top, are there other things that we might want to connect to, potentially to suggest to a user or for various other reasons? And generally, I think most people would say, oh, t-shirts and jeans quite often go together. So in our taxonomy, we've made that connection to say that t-shirts and jeans are related. Now, this is using a SCOS relationship, and the SCOS relationships are powerful, but they are quite generic. It just means the two things are connected. We can't really say anything more than that using SCOS. But what we can do again is this is where we can start to use our ontology. So in our ontology, we have a property called related clothing, and so what we can say in a more precise way is that jeans are related to t-shirt as an item of related clothing. And the reason that we can connect it to genes is because the property related clothing is defined as having a target of genes, or sorry, of clothes. And if we click through to genes, and hopefully everybody's still with me.
Yep.
Yeah, people still there. So here we are. Yeah, that's good. All I can see is my screen. So here we can see that we've gone through to genes, and we can see that this is where another item from our ontology starts to come in. We've used the class of clothing. So it's not only a concept, it's also something that we've defined as an item of clothing. And that's how we managed to connect jeans to t-shirts via that property, because the property was defined as being connecting things that are clothing. And we can see similarly that the related concept goes back to t-shirt. That property is what's called symmetric. It goes both ways. And that's something you can define in an ontology, but that's part of the SCOS standard anyway. So classes, they can serve multiple purposes. They allow you to say, add properties, but they kind of add classification too. But there are many ways or approaches you can take to classifying in more detail. Classes are one approach, collections are another, and even more taxonomies. And people use different approaches for different use cases. There's no one right answer to how you do some of these things. So clothing is from our ontology. Let's go have a look. So if we click on clothing, we now have actually switched to the ontology manager, and the user experience is very similar. So and that's intentional. We want to make it easy for users to work around the application. So here we are in the ontology manager, looking at the definition of the clothing class that we were just using on genes. And so we just have a few classes defined in our ontology: clothing, color, and country at the top level, and a subclass of clothing called upper body clothing. And obviously an ontology is essentially, it defines your domain, your kind of business models, and it may be that upper body clothing has some value. So the ontology will be as complex or as simple as you need it to be for your business, essentially. And as James said, you may be able to find a third-party ontology, or you may need to build it yourself, or combine the two even. So we have some basic information about a class, and then we also have what we call object properties, which are the relationships that we've heard mentioned. If we click through there, we can see we've got a couple. So we've got the related clothing property that we used. And so here we can see that there are various things you can define about that property. And one of those is that the range of the property is clothing. So that defines that the things that it connects to are items of clothing. And you can do a similar thing on the domain. And the domain is really used as to control which concepts the property appears on. So those two things can work together. But these are standard OWL properties and constructs that we're seeing on screen, and that's the basis of the ontology manager, is the OWL W3 standard. So the other kind of property we've got is data type properties, and these essentially have values. So we saw hex color, and here we've defined hex color as, again, having the domain of color and a range. So again, that just controls more tightly where it appears in your concepts. So if we switch back to vocabulary manager, project. So one of the other questions on our slide was about t-shirt size, and so we'll go into our taxonomy of clothing sizes. And as I said at the top, you can create as many taxonomies as you need for your domain and your knowledge graph. And some people would put everything in one taxonomy, but it may be better to break them down in this way that we have here. It really does depend on your own situation. So we have clothing sizes, and we've just put a few in here, and these were typical clothing sizes that you might see. But you can see that there are various questions here. These are not in the order that you might want on, say, a website. the concepts essentially just a bag of concepts. There's no order in the hierarchy other than the fact that we display them alphabetically. So one of the questions here is, well, how can we get those things into something more useful, maybe for our website? And this is where collections come into play. And collections are maybe a slightly understated part of SCOS, but a very powerful part of it. So you can see here that our size medium is actually in the clothing sizes ordered collection, and it's even, we can tell us that it's in position 3. So if we go through to there, we're now into that collection. And if you look on the left, you can see that our sizes are now ordered in a more logical sense of how we might want to present this information to the users. But these are not copies of these concepts. These are exactly the same concepts with the same identifiers. We're just referencing them from a collection. So it's all a graph of connected things. And the collection is just one part of that graph, of your knowledge graph, just ordering certain things for a particular use case in this situation. So one more example of a collection. So that was an ordered collection. If we take countries as another example, and obviously many businesses will have their own list of countries that they need to deal with potentially. I mean, we're just got a small subset of countries here, but if we look at, for instance, Wales. So Wales is obviously part of the UK, but it's also a European country. So we've got another collection here of European countries. Now we only obviously have the 4 that we've set up in the taxonomy, but this could be however many it is these days, 30 plus. And again, that might be useful in a particular part of the business. You could have as many collections, defining as many subsets of things as you need for use of different use cases in different parts of your business. So you can slice and dice your knowledge graph in many ways, and that's quite powerful. Now, there's not only one way to organize this information, even in your graph. So just going back to our list of taxonomies again, and into this time footwear. So here we have a small list of different kinds of footwear, and we'll go into trainers. Now I call them trainers because I'm quite old. I'm sure the younger generation probably have different names for them, and obviously depending on where in the world you are, you will have different names potentially for them too. Now we only have 2 values on screen here to keep it simple, but the interesting point about this screen is that we have an alternative label called gutties, and I did a bit of Googling to find this out, but essentially on the right we have this little Excel tag. Now what this is telling us is here we are dipping in to SCOS Excel. So that's an extension to SCOS that goes an extra mile in terms of the kind of sophistication you can add. So generally labels are just strings, and there's nothing more you can say about them, which is maybe fine for many use cases, but there are certainly use cases where it's useful to be able to say things about the actual labels that you give to things as well. So if we go through to gutties, here we are. Here we're actually looking at the label and it as an entity in its own right. So concepts are one kind of entity in this instance, but labels are another kind of entity. And in this instance, the interesting thing here is we've used our ontology again and the property used in country to say, and you can see it down here at the bottom right of the screen, that the term gutties generally is used in Northern Ireland. I think it's also used in Scotland as well. But what it allows us potentially to do is to say, well, hey, this label is not only, it's in English, but if we've got users in, say, Northern Ireland, we may see this term, or we may want to display this term on our site or in our searches or in our faceted lists. And so we can localize the graph to a particular person's context that they are working within. So that's very powerful. Another example might be to target a label for a certain demographic. Now, gutties may be a term that's used by maybe, I don't know, 15 to 29-year-olds. And again, you could expand your information to that kind of level so that you can target much more accurately where certain terminology is used, and the reverse. If people are using these terms for discovery, that you can kind of work backwards to work out that gutties and are actually trainers. So that gives you more power and more ability to be more user-friendly in terms of the terminology they use, but still get back to those IRIs and those unique identifiers. So we've got Northern Ireland. Let's go through to Northern Ireland. So this takes us again into to another area. So obviously, Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and we can see down here we've got what is called a broad match to the UK. So at the top we saw the UNESCO taxonomy being used, and essentially that's an external taxonomy, but it has some concepts that are similar to the concepts that we've created in our mini taxonomies, and so we may want to relate the two, and that can be very powerful, not only because those external taxonomies may connect to other systems or be used by other systems, but also just to create a richer connection and to be able to reuse that data. So in this instance, we've said that actually Northern Ireland is a match to the concept UK in the UNESCO thesaurus, and so that's quite a powerful connection that we've made there. That's a broad match. If we look at the United States of America, it's even more interesting. Because in UNESCO, they actually have a concept, the United States of America. They call it the USA. And so there's a good example there of essentially the same concept with different labels, but it's essentially the same thing. So in this instance, we've said, hey, these two things are pretty much exact matches. And in the world of SCOS, that allows us to say, well, these two things are pretty much interoperable in how we might want to use the data. So data that UNESCO defines on the USA is probably data that we can use quite safely in our world too. But the ability to have additional external taxonomies, is great. But it can also apply internally as well. If you're a big company and you've maybe grown through acquisition, or you've got legacy systems, they may have their own controlled lists, their own set of countries, for instance. And it can be almost impossible to come up with a unified view across an entire company, a large company. So this kind of approach also can be the beginning of unifying your data, so that maybe you have two different taxonomies of countries from two different systems in your business, but you can start to connect those concepts together, so that you might say that the USA and USA, or the United States of America, are actually the same thing. So you can start to move towards a kind of unified view of the world within your business. And you can see where those connections between the different systems lie. So it's powerful in that respect as well. So as a final part of the demo, because obviously we've been looking at some fairly simple taxonomies, we'll click through to the USA. Now, this is in the UNESCO thesaurus. The UNESCO thesaurus is pretty big. There's over 4,000 concepts in it. And it just highlights a bit more of the power of graphology, which can go up to large taxonomies and large ontologies. So what we have on screen here is more preferred labels. You can see we have Spanish, French, and Russian in this instance, and quite a considerable number of alternative labels. Now, I've seen more than that. I've actually seen, not in UNESCO, I think, but I've seen over 100 alternate labels in some taxonomies. So there can be huge numbers of these things. And then you've got other relationships within UNESCO. Oddly, they seem to only define Hawaii as the only narrower concept of the USA, which I don't know what happened to the rest of the US. But we've got some other interesting relationships. So the USA is related to Puerto Rico. So they've started to build these connections. And there's even a concept of OECD countries. And obviously, there'll be a talk from OECD later. So there are interesting aspects there. And just to show you some of the other information you can see about a concept in here. So if you're interested in the raw data underneath that you might have in graphology, and you might end up putting into, say, MarkLogic, this is the kind of actual raw data under the covers that we are seeing in the printing display. These are triples, so it's actual RDF displayed in a table. The other important aspect for many taxonomists is an audit trail of and the governance aspects of your taxonomy. So here we can see that when I added this relationship, we can see that I've created an exact match to what is the concept of USA in our small taxonomy. And that's an important part potentially of tracking how your taxonomy has changed over time. Taxonomies, they're not static things necessarily. Many are never finished, and they do grow. And so change and knowing how they've changed is an important part of that. And all of that, again, is part of the graph, and you have access to that information. So you can download the history at this level or various other levels, for instance. And on that question of change, so you need somebody, as James said, ideally you have a taxonomist or somebody who looks after your data. You don't want to just leave it dead in one corner, buried in a spreadsheet in many circumstances. And so if you've got a tool like Graphifi, you've got it in a standard format, and you've got the tools to help you manage it and also govern it. And part of that governance can be allowing others to view and make suggestions for changes to that taxonomy. So there is a life cycle, and it may be that subject matter experts make suggestions to the taxonomist for changes, and those could come from various parts of the business. And I think we have one of our customers. I think they're probably somewhere around a dozen to 15 subject matter experts are contributing to their taxonomy, and a taxonomist is in charge of coordinating that and discussing it. And you can do all of that discussion within Graphifi itself. And it's all real time as well. As James mentioned, that Graphifi, it's like Google Docs. Everybody sees all the changes each other's making in real time. That governance aspect can be really quite important. And so between history and life cycle, that is tooling that many people need and want to see. So there are a couple of other bits I just want to show you, just to finish off. So obviously you can have more information about the taxonomy itself. Interestingly, UNESCO has the title in 4 different languages. But there are 2 other important aspects. So the statistics is, information you might want to see. And we can see here that UNESCO has over 4,400 concepts and in various preferred labels. And interestingly, you can see that for some reason Russian seems to be missing about 35 labels. So that information could be quite important, and how you're breaking down and you're maintaining your taxonomy, especially obviously if you're looking for gaps in certain markets that you're targeting or certain languages. Then you have the other sort of governance aspect around quality. Now Graphifi, for the most part, controls what you can do, and there are many rules that SCOs apply, and Graphifi implements all of that to stop you doing certain things. But if you import data, Graphifi doesn't stop you importing certain things that break those rules. But you need to be able to check the quality, and that's an important part of the taxonomy. And so this is actually the quality check running on the UNESCO, and you can see that actually there are some violations of the SCOs rules. In this instance, they've got the same preferred label on different concepts, which is not supposed to happen in a SCOs-based taxonomy. So there are all these various tools that help you manage your taxonomy and get it right, and that's an important part of the overall process. And then obviously you can export it and you can integrate with other systems. So just to summarise, really, we're very much fans of starting small and building, and start with your identifiers, new taxonomies, and add some ontologies in there. Maybe use SCOs Excel if your use cases go to that level, and start to build all that. And that can be the foundations of building a really good knowledge graph. And then there's all those other things that James mentioned that you'll see in future talks. Okay.
Wonderful.
And back to you, I think, James. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. That's really good, really interesting. And I think, the thing that excites me about Graphifi is the UI is so clean and neat and easy to understand. So for me, I think it's a really powerful tool for getting started and getting people going. I don't know that you guys mentioned it, but it's software as a service. So you can sign up online and start to get going with it straight away. So again, one of the barriers that we've seen is lots of people getting worried about starting down this journey. of using taxonomy tools and semantics, well, you know, you can get going with one of these tools pretty quickly, and you've all got MarkLogic, or put it on your laptop and start to bring those things together and get going. Okay, the next thing then is we're going to hand over to Thierry from OECD. And Thierry, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself and talk about what you guys have been doing with MarkLogic and taxonomies.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can you see my screen?
We can, yes. That's
okay.
it. Yeah.
So I'm Thierry. I work at the OECD, which is an international organization dealing with a lot of different subjects, and whose goal is to do some policy making and to make people gather in order to discuss about, let's say, global problems. I belong to the IT department technically. I don't really know my exact title, but for me, my title is knowledge gardener. So I take care of your data, and above all, I try to take the best from your data. So in this context, I will speak about taxonomies, the use of taxonomies at the OECD. We've been using MarkLogic for several years now. We've got lots of systems, lots of applications in MarkLogic, not all, but I'm dealing with many of them. And we use MarkLogic because it allows us to do some semantics, to do some reasoning, and to use XML. We are combining everything, and this is one of the platforms which is the best place for that. So I'm going to explain you what kind of taxonomies we use, because a taxonomy is not a frozen object. It can be used in different ways. Very often people are talking about taxonomies, but they don't really talk about the same thing, although they use the same word. You will see that some of our taxonomies are more ontologies than simple taxonomies. So basically, taxonomy is not a product; it's more an art. It's the art of ordinancing knowledge, putting order in your knowledge. It's something you can do at home, just while writing your shopping list or things like that. That's something sometimes you do in your head without even talking about taxonomies. But that's more a way of working than anything else, because the different products that you can call taxonomies may be really different, really heterogeneous. So the first kind of taxonomy you may encounter is really basic. Is really basic. That's something you can even find in SQL or in other systems. These are taxonomies just as reference lists. You want to bring some consistency in your application. You want to have a shared code list, for example. These are already taxonomies. These are lists of concepts, maybe very flat, maybe very simple, very small, but this is just a way to harmonize your data, to harmonize your codes, your labels, etc. And you can use a same small taxonomy across different applications. It can only be beneficial. So on your screen, you've got, for example, a screenshot of a small taxonomy that we are using across different applications, different heterogeneous applications, which is a taxonomy of budget ranges in euros. So some of our projects are asking their user to evaluate their projects, their programs, their policy initiatives, or their policy instruments in terms of budget. And instead of asking for an amount, we ask them to select one of these taxonomic elements. So it's just a way to have an agreement on the different in the different platform using this taxonomy, so that they always use the same URI. And when we have to change, for example, or to add a new taxonomic concept, the replication is automatic on every platform. This is really important. The fact that even for such simplest thing, I say simplest because usually speaking, the way you will see in action this taxonomy is basically in a drop-down box, for example. But even for that, it's very interesting. It's very valuable to use COS format to build you a true taxonomy, because you will be able then to, for example, to add new languages. If you are only in French, you will be able to add very easily an English layer, and it will be, let's say, natural, because the SCOS specification allows, and the RDF specification allows you to language qualify your labels. So even for such very simple things, it's beneficial to use taxonomy. Then you've got another kind of taxonomy, which maybe now we are switching from something very basic to something which is much more complicated. At the OECD, we use our main taxonomies, which are topics and geographical areas. Topics are basically either theoretical ideas or concrete objects, like, I don't know, chair or cat, but also economic policy, public investment. And we've got, I don't remember, maybe 7,000 of concepts in French and in English. And geographical areas are basically concepts about everything in the world which has some square meters. It may be an ocean, it may be a town, it may be a country, a simple place without any political signification, but everything which is in the world. And basically, we use these two taxonomies to help us tag our resources. We've got lots of text, lots of documents, a lot of fragments, articles, chapters, etc. And in the context of our semantic applications, semantic search application, we tag everything, every single text, using semantic analysis tools, which is another world. These semantic analysis tools are basically programs, robots, which are able, quote, able to read text, maybe to understand them at the grammatical or syntactic level, and then which are able to detect some key concepts, some key words, key sentences, or key groups of words based on certain patterns or on certain taxonomies. So we've got some main robots which are fed with these taxonomies, and based on these taxonomies, they are able to read the text and to extract words matching our taxonomic concepts. So this is really key for us. These kind of two taxonomies are key for us. But if you use a taxonomy for this purpose, then you cannot just say, okay, for each taxonomic concept, I will have a preferred label in French and a preferred label in English, and then some synonyms. It's not enough, because a machine is going to use them to try and read a text. And you know, in a text, within a text, there's a lot of ambiguity. If I say, for example, if I found the word party in a text, you cannot know which is exactly the meaning of party. So there's lots of ambiguity. When we deal with semantic analysis, we spend 95% of our time trying to disambiguate, to help the machine not to confuse, for example, the Queen Elizabeth II and the ship Queen Elizabeth II, because the machine is really agnostic. It means concretely that when we build our taxonomy, and you can see our taxonomy management tools, which is Enterprise Vocabulary Network from Top Quadrant, we are, of course, creating the usual stuff for a taxonomy, indicating the type of concept and this kind of basic stuff, but we are emphasizing labels. We are working a lot on the labels, on the preferred labels, but also on the alternate labels, which may be acronyms, synonyms, and also the hidden labels, which may be, very, how to say that, small deviation from the other labels in terms of hyphens, in terms of singular or plural, when it's not very obvious for the machine. And we also created some custom fields in these two taxonomies in order to manage the ambiguity, in order to explain the machine how to select, when and how to select one or another taxonomic concept. In the term of, in the example of parties, for example, our taxonomic concept is about parties, how to say that, parties like in a trial. It's not about sexualities, because in French, party may have a sexual implication. So we are able to say, for example, if in the same sentence, you find the word party, but you find also the adjective sexual, it means that it's not the right meaning. So you don't select the topic. On the other sense, if in one sentence you find the adjective adverse or contractant with the label parties, then you select it because it's in the right context of our taxonomic concept. And we can also insert some blacklists saying if you encounter parties, but with this word before, the working parties, etc., it's not at all our context. We've got that because at the OECD, we've got lots of meetings, lots of working parties. So working parties is something which is written a lot in our reports, and we don't want the machine to mix this meaning of parties and working parties. At the beginning of our work, we didn't have that, and it was a complete mess. And the quality of our tagging was very bad. So we worked a lot, we analyzed the result, we analyzed the documents, and we formalized all this disambiguation in the taxonomy. So this kind of taxonomies, there's a lot of work on the labeling and on the disambiguation fields, but there are also taxonomies with a lot of links, lots of relationships. There's a reason, because when you tag a text, if your text is 40 pages long, for example, you will get a lot of tags. How to know what are the best tags? That's another question. And the taxonomies are also helping us in resolving this problem. You could say, of course, I'm going to say if a tag is found, for example, 100 times, then it's a proof that it's very important. Yes and no. It depends also. For example, the word report at the OECD is really frequent in the documents because we do a lot of reports. So if we just based our ranking on the frequency of the tags, we in each single publication, articles, etc., the tag report will be the most used tags. So we have to create ponderation index based on the standard vocabulary, the most common vocabulary found at the OECD, and we associate to each taxonomic concept, let's say a ponderation number. And then we also take into account the fact that one taxonomic concept has got broader, narrower, or related in order to refine this ponderation index. So the relationships in this kind of taxonomies are also keys to get a good result in tagging. So this is quite complex. This is something that we discovered little by little, because at the beginning we were just using taxonomies, like reference taxonomies, but then working with semantic analysis tools, backed on these taxonomies, we had to extend our model of taxonomic concept to work more on the labels and to work more on the disambiguation process. Of course, it does not mean that these two taxonomies are used only for semantic analysis tools. On the contrary, there is not white or black. This is one of the purpose of these taxonomies. If I go back to this one, the first one, this one is not used at all by semantic analysis tools. We don't have to work on labels, to work on disambiguity mechanisms. But for these ones, yes, we have to. And the role of these taxonomies as a source for the semantic analysis tools is something invisible for the user. It's not in the interface, it's in batch, it's in the background. You do that at night, you tag, etc. But the quality of tagging is really key, and it's backed on this taxonomy and the work we do on these taxonomies. That's also why our taxonomy management tools is not inside MarkLogic, is not connected directly and in real time with MarkLogic. Because if it was the case, and if we were to change something in these labels or in the disambiguation mechanisms, and if it were to be replicated in real time in MarkLogic, certainly sometimes there would be catastrophes, because we have to test. The key things when you work with semantic analysis tools is to do what we call validation, to validate the result of your semantic analysis tools each time you modify the taxonomy. That's why we never replicate in real time our taxonomies. It's too dangerous for us. And even if you change a link, it may have an impact, for example, in some applications in MarkLogic using these links. So it's always separated. And I think that's a good practice. Once we are sure that the taxonomy is correct, and basically we do that every month, we then replicate the taxonomy. And by the way, as it was said previously, we have to make this taxonomy live. There's a life cycle. Every month we produce a new version of our taxonomies, a new version of our semantic analysis tools using the feedback from users or the feedback got from the logs, from the semantic search, etc. And we try to improve, to add new concept, to improve the disambiguation, etc. So that's really key. Otherwise, that taxonomy won't be very useful for a long time. Within 2 or 3 years, there will be some discrepancies with the reality of your work or with the reality of the world. So that was the second type of taxonomies, the one used by semantic analysis. And the third type is kind of the most evaluated. It's really taxonomies in action for the user. So taxonomies as a way to discover information, to help people to find new information they were not even thinking about. So for example, in this kind of taxonomies, we make an extensive use of relationships. So either vertical ones like broader and narrower, or horizontal ones related, or many other, because for example, for the geographical area taxonomy, we don't use cost broader and cost narrower or cost related, because these relationships are not semantic enough. For example, we don't say that France is within Western Europe, is a narrower of Western Europe. We say France is fully located within Western Europe. We don't say that Paris is a narrower of France. We say two things. We say Paris is fully located within France, and Paris has an administrative parent, which is France, because we needed to manage both the geophysical aspect in this taxonomy and the geopolitical aspect also. That's why we created specific relationships, more semantic for us, and that's why our taxonomy are now adding more to ontologies than anything else. Using all these relationships allows us, for example, during a semantic search, to when somebody, for example, is let me show you that. when somebody is looking for vegetable oils in Italy, your result will include also vegetable oil, for example, in Puglia or in Abruzzo or in Rome. So semantic expansion means that the machine is able from one concept to give all the children concept and the grandchildren concept, for example. That's very important because sometimes you type a search query which may be a bit fuzzy, and probably there will be 100 results under vegetable oil in Italy, but there will be also 500 results under vegetable oil in Puglia because there are more olive tree in Puglia than in northern Italy, for example. So it's a way to help the user. If, for example, you are a newbie in cheese, in French cheese, and your boss is asking you to work on cheese or on dairy products, and you don't even know that the dairy products may be milk or cream or butter, the machine will tell you that. You will discover also things through this semantic expansion. And we use the links in the taxonomy or the relationships to do that. And you may also drift your search and discover new things. In this example, for example, matching the query vegetable oil in Italy, when you open the discovery pane, you are also provided with margarine in Italy or essential oils in Italy, because these are vegetable oils also. They are other kind. They are close concept. But it can apply also to geography. For example, the system knows that Italy has got several neighbors. So then here you are provided with the different neighbors of Italy and the same query, vegetable oils in France or in Switzerland, maybe also in Greece or things like that. So you could, as far as you've got the knowledge in your taxonomy, you could propose whatever discovery you want. If, for example, you provide me with the side of the road on which each country is driving, I can do some discovery based on this kind of relationships. It has no interest, I agree, but it could be done. I don't know, for an application specialized on transportation or things like that, maybe it could be of interest. So if you've got a need, you can encode the solution in the taxonomy in order to action it in your interfaces. And I would say that if you've got no need in terms of taxonomy, in terms of discovery, it's no use enhancing a taxonomy or creating relationships. You must have also a goal. A taxonomy without any goal, it's a dead taxonomy. So all our relationships, for example, in any kind of taxonomy, are based on business needs, basically. And the third thing, very important, I talked about relationships inside taxonomies, but one thing really important that we call taxonomic alignment is relationships between different taxonomies. So how to align different taxonomies. So it could be for reference purposes, like aligning the OECD taxonomy with the UNESCO taxonomy and with the IMF taxonomy. Okay, but what is the purpose? But what is more interesting is to create relationships, complex relationships, so that on the screen, you may aggregate very heterogeneous resources. If you consider this example, coming from a real interface, it's on the same page. I just cut some other dashboards. Here you've got two dashboards aggregating different resources coming from surveys. So basically, these are policy initiatives provided by different jurisdictions. So policy initiative talking about innovation. So it's very strange word. And here you've got associated publications to these policy initiatives. These are resources which are tagged with innovation themes, with target groups. There's no notion of topics, for example. And these are bibliographical references which are crawled from outside, OECD publication, EU publications or articles. And basically these publications are tagged with our topics taxonomy. So how can we display on the same screen relevant publication to things which have no common tags? We've got topics here. We've got, for example, themes or target group. Target groups are researchers or students or, I don't know, public institutes, things like that. We do that through alignment. We say, for example, in our taxonomy of target group, for the taxonomic concept researcher, it will match the concept in the topics taxonomy of students, researcher, PhD students, postdoctorate students, or whatever. We create alignment. And then at the time of displaying the data, we create Sparkle requests. We do inferences. It means that coming from this target group, for example, we look in the taxonomy. Okay, this is let's say secondary students. Let's see in the taxonomy what are the topics associated. We've got 3 topics associated. Now we are going to search within this collection of resources all the resources which has got one of these 3 taxonomic concepts coming from the alignment of the target group. In this way, we are able to display on a page dedicated to public-private partnership target groups, for example, or no, maybe I don't know, PhD students. We are able to display relevant publications, and we can do that also combining several criteria, because on this page we may have a page dedicated about students, but also a page dedicated about students in Russian Federation, in which case we do a double alignment. We get all the resources which are aligned with students, but we get also all the resources talking about Russian Federation or one of his children. It may be a problem of students in Moscow. In this case, we will get also the publication. So it's a way for us to taxonomies are a way to aggregate very, very different kind of resources. And honestly, we like to do that. We love to do that because we can see the value added. It's very easy to set up. It's really easy to change, to tweak, to refine when you think there's a problem, and it's very efficient. And the fourth type of taxonomies, which is a bit brand new at the OECD, is taxonomies as master data. You know, in our organization, for example, especially let's say for countries, when we are writing about one country, we don't have the choice in terms of the preferred label. Our legal department is enforcing a list of country names. What kind of label do you use in French and in English when you are in a text, when you are in a table, when you are in a footnote? There are very strict rules, and for the moment our legal department is not really able to enforce this kind of rules, because we should have we've got different types of databases. It's very difficult to harmonize, and there's no specific mechanism to do that. So now we've got taxonomies which are backed on master data management mechanism in order to enforce our organization-wide definitions or label of way of designing of displaying things. These taxonomies may be existing taxonomies, such as geographical areas also, but also very simple taxonomies for which sometimes there's no label. For example, there's one project at the OECD which is created, and this project has got some jurisdictions, a list of, let's say, 10 jurisdictions, which maybe are not even OECD countries. So their taxonomy is going to have 10 countries. There will be no label in this country because they will have to back on the legal taxonomy of labels. So it will be a very small taxonomy with some types saying, okay, this is my project countries. Okay, but we are in the process of creating inference mechanism so that each time an application needs to get, for example, a country label, even if this application has its own taxonomy, the legal taxonomy will have a prescience. And we will be sure that the correct labeling is used in terms of countries. You know, we live in a kind of diplomatic world. We cannot say Taiwan, for example. We have to say Chinese Taipei, otherwise there will be a great revolution, a huge revolution, etc. So we must be sure that we can enforce this kind of data, of master data. And the way the taxonomies that we are using and the new taxonomies that we are creating, when you associate them with inference mechanism to ensure the preference, the prescience and preference of master data, you are able to enforce the organization-wide rules. It's very difficult to demonstrate because everything is in the process, not in the interface. It's just when an application needs a list of labels of countries, it's just to ensure that the API, which is going to deliver this list of labels, will be enforcing the rules of prescience in the taxonomies, and will give the priority to the legal taxonomy. If it's an official project, we can also, thanks to graphs, thanks to inferences, we can also imagine that one project has got two views. One official views when writing publication, and in these views, the project will be provided with official and legal labels, but he may have also, let's say, unofficial views, for which he will be provided with other kind of taxonomic labels. That's also possible, and that's the beauty of RDF and all the graphs. So this is an ongoing project for us. It's kind of very difficult because you have to everything is in the dialogue between the taxonomic system and the external applications, and lots of these applications does not understand URIs, for example, or things like that. So it's kind of difficult, but it was the prescience mechanism was kind of very easy to set up, and it works well. So we hope that it will also ease the life of our legal department, because they've got sometimes problems with member countries which are not happy because they have been mentioned as, I don't know, Chinese Taiwan. Also, you have to say Chinese Taipei, etc. So this is another way also to use taxonomies as master data. And you could tell me, okay, taxonomies as reference lists, the first item I demonstrated, and taxonomies as master data, it's a bit the same thing. Yes and no. Master data are reference lists, of course, but behind the scenes, there are mechanisms to enforce the fact that they are master data. And what is important in master data is the mechanism, the enforcement mechanism, even more than the taxonomy by itself. So I think I'm at the end of my presentation. One last thing I would say, and I already said that, is every taxonomy may be of one or several types of all these taxonomies that I presented. Of course, it's not white and black. Our topics and geographical area taxonomy are used as reference list, are used by semantic tools, are used by discovery tools, and are also used in the case of geographical areas as master data. So the world is always gray as usual. Voila, that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Thierry. That was incredibly interesting. Thank you. And I think shows the real power of what you guys have built using semantics and taxonomies. And for me, it's really nice to see the Graphifi demo, which shows how you can start small. And then when you put it in the hands of the right people with the right knowledge, the power that you can bring by using these tools.
Right, yes.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Right, I'm just going to share my screen again. See if I can find the right screen. Okay, hopefully you can see summary. Yep. So hopefully today you've seen the huge power in the use of taxonomies and ontologies and how they help define the content and make sense of the alternate ways of describing concepts and your world and the concepts and context behind them. And I think from what Thierry was just showing is, you know, the first steps of how they can use this to focus your tagging. You know, you can see a stop term. If it was around other terms, you can say, okay, don't tag this with that term because it also has these other terms around it, and therefore it's not in the right context that we're interested in. You know, having the way that you want to surface that information. I love that example of neighboring countries. You know, if you had to tag every piece of content with all of this information, it wouldn't be possible. You know, you would just get out of control so quickly. But by putting it in an ontology, you can tag it with one simple label and have all of this other information available to you and to the way that you want to present it to your customers. And I like the way that you were referencing external articles and using and aligning their relationship to your terms, which was really cool. And I think the other really important thing we looked at was the quality. So, you know, we touched on it earlier on, and I think, you know, Thierry was mentioning it there, the quality of your ontology and your taxonomy and the way that you put this together. And as you can see, it can be quite complex if you're using all of the functions. It's really important to get the right people, the right tools in place to help you manage it. You know, I hope that you can all have someone like a knowledge gardener available in your company to help you tend everything. So the important thing is it's not difficult to get started. You know, you can sign up to, you know, tools like Graphifi and start putting those ontologies in place. You've got the power of MarkLogic. Let's bring those things together and see what you can do. I'm going to put a short poll up on screen while we're just closing a few things out. So if you guys can take the time to just fill this in as we're doing stuff. So let me just launch that. Okay. We've got 2 more events coming up. Next week, we're looking at entity extraction and knowledge graphs. So now we sort of work on the assumption that you've got some sort of ontology in place. What can you do with it? How do we connect it to your data, and what can we build from it? And then, of course, we've also said on the 3rd week, on the 20th of May, we've got the next generation applications. So we're going to be showing the outcome of having all these things together. And this is where we can really inspire you with new ideas and new thoughts and bring your business stakeholders into these so they can see some, you know, potential of what you can do with this technology. You know, we're happy to help. We're always available on call if you need us. So feel free to reach out to us for more information, or reach out to some of those parties, you know, you've seen today, the Graphology guys. You know, 67 Bricks will be presenting later in the week. MarkLogic will be presenting, DataVid. All of these guys are available online and can talk around the power of taxonomies and MarkLogic. So thank you, everyone. Open to Q&A. If anybody has some questions you'd like to put in the chat, or Phil, I don't know if you've managed to gather anything.
No, nothing in particular. I just want to thank the presenters, both Graphifi and OECD. They're really great, really detailed information on, you know, 1, how your product works, and 2, how you're implementing this in the OECD. And yes, I think everyone would like a knowledge gardener to help them with their ontologies and taxonomies. But like I say, it's good that you can get going with these tools really quickly. You know, if you're a MarkLogic customer, you can take advantages of the features that we have in this. So
yeah, absolutely. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. We hope you found it valuable, and we'll see you next week.